I don't know about you, but my cutting board is probably my most used kitchen item, and it is also the item that probably gets the least amount of care. And today I'm going to show you how you can take really good care of your wood cutting boards. We're going to cover how to clean off stains, how to deodorize it if it gets kind of stinky, some basic sanitation practices, and also how to make a really simple cutting board conditioner. I'm Kelsey from roughandtumblefarmhouse.com, where every single week I share stories about farming, family food, and fortitude here on our 5-acre homestead in northern Minnesota. So first, let's cover washing your cutting board. Make sure you never fully submerge your cutting board in water. Don't just plunk it in the sink and let it absorb all that water. It's really not good for the wood. Any wood kitchen utensils really should just be rinsed under the water, scrubbed off, and then laid out to dry thoroughly. So that's how we want to wash it. When it comes to sanitizing your cutting board, a really simple thing you can do is to just keep a bottle of vinegar on hand, and then after you have cleaned your cutting board, let's say you do like chicken or something on a wood cutting board, which I usually don't do. So I normally do my meats on my plastic cutting board so I can stick them in the dishwasher. But let's say you just do something on your cutting board, you really want to sanitize it or work on a little bit of a smell. Like let's say you do onions or something that has a really strong scent, garlic. After you've washed it up, you can just take your spray bottle of just straight vinegar, use white vinegar, the 5% stuff, like the type you'd use for canning, and just spray it across the top of your cutting board. Let it sit for about 5 minutes and then wipe it clean. And that vinegar really should do a good job of helping do some deodorizing. It also is excellent for helping fight bacteria. Studies have actually proven that it's not just like an old wives' tale. Vinegar actually has bacteria fighting properties. So that's just a really quick way to sanitize your cutting board. One of the first things we're going to do here is try and get rid of some stains on the cutting board. To do that, you want to use some sandpaper. Now what you want really is to start with a heavier grit sandpaper, like 100 grit, and then move to a finer grit into a finer grit. So this is a 220 grit, which is the finest grit. I completely forgot to go to the store and get some coarser grit sandpapers. This is just what I use actually for my eggs. And so you just want to do a gentle sanding with coarse finer grit. And then after that, kind of brush it off a little bit. And then we're going to make a really simple paste. All it is baking soda, so 2 tablespoons of baking soda. And you're going to do 1 tablespoon of salt. And after that, tablespoons of nice hot water. And then go ahead and stir that together just to make a little bit of a paste here. It almost kind of looks like this pink salt of mine. And then after that, you're going to work that into the entire board all the way across, focusing on kind of your problem areas here. And it can help if the cutting board is a little bit wet already for this process, but it certainly doesn't have to be, especially if you're using nice warm water. It kind of makes that wood a little more supple. And here you can see my sponge is just gross, and that's not, I wiped it off really well, so that's not from the sanding, that's just just what's coming off. So that's really good for deodorizing if you cut up onions or something on there, and also for getting rid of some spots. So it did a pretty good job of getting rid of the stains from the beets that I had cut on there, but just to really drive it home, it was still a tiny bit pink from the beets. Another option you can use is to first sprinkle a really coarse salt across the cutting board. Again, if it's slightly wet, that's good, or a little damp. And then you are going to use lemon, nature's really wonderful kind of bleaching agent cleaner extraordinaire. Squeeze it all across the board. It's a pretty decent sized board here, and 1 lemon worked just fine. Then use the lemon itself to scrub the salt into the cutting board. So this is another way. Again, you can deodorize and also do a little bit of stain treating on your wood cutting boards with just kind of all natural things that are fairly gentle. So let that sit for a few minutes after you've scrubbed the whole board, and then give it a quick little rinse. So there you can see that the stains from the beets are pretty much completely gone, and it's looking pretty good. Okay, so we have sanded, we have deodorized, we have sanitized, we have de-stained, and now it is time for this cutting board to get a good condition. So there's a couple options for wood conditioners that you can use. The most common you're going to see people talk about is just a mineral oil. And if you look online, there are a bunch of kind of fancy boutique sort of mineral oils that you can get that are like $10 to $20. Let me tell you, don't spend that money. I mean, you can if you really want to, but you don't have to. You can just go to Walmart or wherever and just get, I'm not like sponsored by it, I'm going to cover the brand. You can just get a really cheap bottle of mineral oil that's the exact same thing in the pharmacy for, I think this was like $2.05 or something for this whole thing. And this will last me a very long time. So Mineral oil in the pharmacy is pharmaceutical grade, which is actually even a higher grade than food grade. So it is perfectly fine to use just the pharmacy mineral oil on your cutting boards and other wood utensils. So if you want to, I'm not going to use just the mineral oil on the cutting board, but if you want to do that and not do this kind of slightly fancier recipe with beeswax, all you have to do is just take off the cap and take either a paper towel or kind of a dedicated cloth you're going to use just for your cutting board, because it isn't oil, it's not a cloth you want to just throw in the laundry with your clothes. You're going to get oil spots all over the place. So take your cloth, put it on the top, kind of dip it like that, and then just work it into the surface of your cutting board. But we're going to go one step beyond to make something a little fancier, and we are going to add this mineral oil to some chunked up beeswax in a double boiler. So I'll show you how that works. Okay, so I have my double boiler here in just a 1 cup measuring cup, and we are just going to add the mineral oil to the double boiler. So it's 1 cup of mineral oil. And again, this will last you a good long time. I'm talking possibly years, depending on how often you condition your cutting boards. So there is 1 cup of mineral oil. If you don't have an actual double boiler like this, you can really easily make one. Just stick a pot on the stove with about 1 inch of water and then put a heat-safe bowl on top so that it's not actually touching the water, and then let her buck. That's basically how you make a double boiler. So this is the beeswax, just 1/4 cup of beeswax. You can just get the pelleted stuff on Amazon. That will work just fine. This is kind of a natural raw beeswax that I got from a local beekeeper that I like to use for all sorts of stuff, but it doesn't matter if it's scented or not. If your cutting board smells slightly like honey, it's not a big deal either way. So now I'm going to stick this on the stove and let it melt down. When it comes to stirring anything I'm making with beeswax, I like to use a popsicle stick or a toothpick or another sort of thing you can just toss afterwards, because beeswax, sorry, it's awfully misty here, awfully steamy. Beeswax is a real pain to clean off of stuff, so unless you have a tool, you're going to just have a dedicated beeswax mixture stirring tool. I recommend just using something you can toss afterwards. So it's just about all melted here. So once the beeswax is completely gone and all stirred in really well, we're just going to pour this into a heat-safe jar. I'm just going to use a little canning jar. Okay, so it is all mixed and melted, so I'm just going to pour it into my jar here. And I'm going to leave a little bit of room at the top because I'm actually going to keep stirring this as it sets, because if you don't, it's going to separate out a little bit. So I'm probably just going to actually leave the stick just sit here and leave it out here open and exposed. It'll take, might take more than an hour for it to solidify. We'll have to see here. It depends on the temperature of your house. But as you can see, maybe you can see here on the stick a little bit, it's starting to get a little goopy already. So these things cool pretty quickly, but we just want to make sure we're still making sure it stays nice and homogeneous as it cools. So we'll just check back on this once it's a little more solid. Other container that I have that is a half pint is taking forever to set up. Well, not forever, but longer than I have before my kids and husband get home and the house becomes a disaster. So this was a little bit extra that I couldn't quite fit in the container, and you can see this is already starting to set up. There's just less of it, more surface area, so it's able to cool more quickly. So this will be a little more solid as it finishes, but you can see it's almost, I don't know, kind of almost like a frosting type texture, like for a sugar cookie, but it will get a little thicker as it cools more. So, but this is roughly what we're looking for here, and so we don't see any separation at all. And so we're going to go ahead and use this to condition our cutting board. So again, make sure you're using either a paper towel that you are just going to toss when you are done with it, or you are using a towel that's going to be dedicated to this. I mean, it's not like it's actually getting dirty, it's just getting a little bit oily. So just kind of tuck it away and use it just for conditioning your cutting boards and your other wood utensils, but please do not wash it in your laundry. It will be a disaster. So I'm just dipping a little bit here onto my cloth, and then I am just going to start working it into my cutting board. So it doesn't take a ton, but you can kind of see as you go when you start needing a little bit more. So already cutting board is looking, I mean, look at the difference just between between the two. So I'm just going to work this in all the way around the cutting board, just a little dip at a time. And it's a good idea to do this in the evening and let all this conditioning soak in And then in the morning, if there is anything left on the surface, which, as long as you're not being too liberal with your application, there probably won't be. But if there is anything, you can just give it a nice little wipe in the morning before you use it. And otherwise, just if you're doing it right away in the morning, let it just sit for a couple of hours before you go ahead and start using it. So I'm going to keep on working on this, and then we'll take a look at when she's done. That's it. You should have a cutting board that looks good, is stain-free, doesn't have a whole lot of cut marks. That is if you remember to pick up the correct grit sandpaper like I failed to do. But overall, your cutting board should be in fit fighting shape. That conditioner that we made, that will last basically indefinitely. In terms of how often you should condition your cutting board, that really depends on how much you use it. Could be as often as a couple times a month, or maybe once a month at least is kind of a good standard. And make sure too, you're not conditioning just the top, but ours as well. Haven't conditioned the back just yet, but your back can also use a good conditioning. It's good to keep all that wood in nice shape. So thank you so much for watching. Let me know if you have any great cutting board tips below. It always helps our community to share resources that way. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure you tune in next week for more farming, family, food, and fortitude here at our Rough and Tumble Farmhouse.